Welcome everybody to Manchester Art Gallery. I'm Natasha Howes, I'm Senior Curator here at the Gallery, and I'm really delighted to welcome Neha Choksi to be with us today to have an in-conversation. I'm hoping we're going to talk for about 30 minutes and then open the floor to questions. I firstly wanted to say the reason why we're in the lecture theatre. Usually I like to give talks in the gallery space with the artworks behind us, but obviously Neha has created a 7-channel film installation, which is really all-encompassing and all-enveloping, and we couldn't be up there. We wouldn't, well, for a start, you wouldn't be able to hear us, but also, you know, you'd be really distracted by the visual imagery. So we're down here in the lecture theatre, but for those of you who haven't yet had a chance to see the film, I do encourage you to go upstairs afterwards and spend lots of time with it. So Neha Choksi is an artist who is based in Los Angeles and Mumbai. She works in many different media, including performance, sculpture, video, photography, painting, and sound. Her work has been exhibited worldwide in galleries, museums, festivals, film screenings, and is in notable public and private collections. She was recently honoured with the India Today 2017 award for the Best Media Artist of the Year. So before we talk about the new work, Faith and Friction, I wanted to give a bit of context to your work and your practice. So I wondered if you could talk generally about your practice, which is often based on investigating simple propositions which relate to philosophical questions about existence. And maybe you could highlight a couple of key works that really exemplify that.
I'm delighted to be here first, and thank you, Natasha, for having me, and the Manchester Art Gallery for helping me produce this work. So thank you. In terms of my practice, I'm essentially a materially based and materially invested artist, whether it's, even if I'm making performance works or film works, ultimately I'm really interested in the mundane quality of the everyday life, and the interactions we have with each other, and the experiences of loss, change, and transformation that all of us experience in our life. So in terms of like earlier work that led me to this point, I would like to highlight probably the trilogy on absenting, which is a 3-part performance-based work that started in 2007 when I shot a film called Leaf Fall, in which I had a troupe of actors denude a tree over the course of a single day, leaving behind a sort of single autumnal sprig. And the point was, in order to see that last leaf, to actually experience that, the existence of that leaf, you needed the absence of all the rest. So that was kind of how I started thinking about absence and presence in very concrete terms. The next 2 pieces in that trilogy involved me anesthetizing myself in 4 farm animals for a piece called Minds to Lose, and then the last one was I built a boat out of ice, and I rode it on a lake about 4 hours outside of Bombay until it melted. It took about 45 minutes. But that sort of directly links to this, in that they're all performative and video works, film works. But there is a substantial portion of my practice that is actually sculpture. And I guess a piece I would like to point out would be a series of bronzes I've made that take apart the process of making a bronze sculpture. So you normally have a pattern, and you have to add all these input and output pipes from which the molten metal would be transferred into the cavity that would be the actual sculpture. And in order for the cavity to actually not burst with the pressure of the air in it, you need outlets for the air to go out. So those, and you need a pouring cup in which you actually pour the molten metal into the pattern. I basically excised the pattern, the model, the actual sculpture from that entire system, and made sculptures that are only about the process of making a bronze sculpture. So you see the pouring cup, you see the inlet, and you see the outlet, and the actual pattern's missing. And there's a series of sculptures that are like that. And so I guess that kind of points to my interest in figuring out some way to access experiences of loss temporally, psychologically, sociologically, intellectually. And that's kind of how I eventually came to this piece, Faith and Friction. I'd been thinking about all my friends over several decades that I've been on Earth, and I tried to figure out a way that I could encompass my experience of my friendships and the losses in friendships, and then the regrowth of some of those friendships, people that I've not been in touch with for a while and then came back in touch with. And I kind of wanted to figure out a way to talk about abstractly not only friendship and engagement, but also about the experience of being human. I guess one of my beliefs, contrary to much of Western psychology, not all, I'll admit. I mean, there are certain strains of Lacanian psychoanalysis that don't quite feel that way. But most of Western psychology, most therapeutic models will posit the need to become independent. And codependency is seen as something not useful in our individual growth. And I kind of wanted to question that and combat that through my own experiences, which is to say that I think that we're born free as human beings when we're these little helpless infants. And the process of becoming civilized, of becoming human, is the process of learning to engage with and depend on each other. And so that's kind of where this piece came out of: faith in friction and engagement, in friendship, in all that entails. And that's why friction, I mean, sort of like a car needs friction to drive. Without that friction, it would actually slip slide all over the place. So that's sort of a précis version.
So one of the things that is very present in the film is the Jain ashram, where you went to film and do this experiment where you're investigating what it is to be yourself and to be with others. And this particular Jain ashram is a modernizing one. It's about a 4-hour drive north of Mumbai, as I understand. And I believe you heard about this place because one of your friends is an architect on the site. And so what I'm interested in is what came first. Did you hear about the Jain ashram being under construction? Did you hear about that first and then that fitted in with your ideas? Or were you already thinking about this idea of codependency and then you heard about the Jain ashram and then these two things came together?
I think there were two separate parallel tracks that I did not know would converge at all. I knew my friend Kapil Gupta of Siri Architects. They have offices in London and in Bombay. And they're kind of well known for being sort of intellectually vanguard in their practice. So it's kind of unusual for this Jain ashram to actually hire somebody that vanguard. And that was kind of the point of choosing this. Jains also don't have ashrams. You're supposed to be peripatetic if you're a saint. You're a mendicant sadhu or a mendicant sadhvi. You do not have a guru system within ashram. So it was already a strange beast. But I'd heard about it probably 4 years ago or 5 years ago. And Kapil and I had always talked about, like, we should do something on that site. We had no idea this would be it. And parallel to this, like, I think about 10 years ago, I'd started researching these psychological tests that are called projective tests, where you draw or you interpret something that's visual. And so I was particularly looking at this test called the House Tree Person Personality Test, which is, mostly used with schizophrenics and children because it's not really valid, or it has limited value for the normal population. But I started looking at these psychological tests, and I was interested in where science failed in isolating the experience of being a human being. I mean, it always falls short. And so I was thinking about how these tests are all falling short, and obviously this ashram, to me, will always fall short. Most religious experiences, I think, are, I should backtrack. I think of most religions, it's fairly selfish. It's the salvation of your own soul in any system. Most people are thinking about that. So even the people who will go to this Jain ashram will be seeking something for themselves. And I'm interested in the experience of being in that community, which is more productive for my mental space. So that's kind of, the parallel tracks kept going on over the years, and eventually they converged. And I think I would have tried to make some version of this piece regardless. It's just, it was handy that you came along.
At the right time.
Right, yeah.
So, I mean, for me, it's been absolutely fascinating to watch this process over 18 months. I think we first met 18 months ago. We invited you to Manchester to see the space. You went away and thought about what you might do. You said, well, I think I'm going to make a film. And then you started talking about these ideas. And I think the sort of kernel of the idea has stayed the same, but conceptually it's really developed.
Right.
And it was still developing, you know, right up until you shot it, and then I think possibly also in post-production with the editing.
Sure, absolutely.
So just wondered if you could talk about that process of that development of the work. So not practically, but just more conceptually.
All right, I'll go backtrack just a little bit just to say that typically my projects have, sometimes they're really short gestation periods, but some of them are really long. Ice Boat, for instance, was shot in 2012, but it was actually conceived in 2006, before I even did Leaf Fall or that anesthesia piece, Minds to Lose. It's just something stays with me for a while, and if I'm not able to get the resources together, I wait. So in this particular case, yeah, part of the process conceptually was to keep it open enough such that my 7 editors, including myself, would have a way to deal with the footage. So it was not preconceived in any way that this is what they would look like. It was a matter of conversations with everyone from the get-go. So for those of you who have not seen the film, it is a 7-channel film installation, but each channel is edited by a separate film editor, and they were all given the same 34 hours of footage to work with. It's just what my conversation with them was and what their interests were that dictated the final shape of that particular edit. But that sort of ethos was with the costume designer, where we were talking about how to make costumes that can latch onto each other. They have carabiners, they have sashes. How can several people inhabit the same piece of clothing? So they have several holes for heads. Some people's, I think your costume had several sleeves, Shri. So did yours, right? Yvonne, she was also in the piece. Yeah, they were like, yeah, they were kind of built so that like people could enter and exit from those costumes. Then the lens choices, like when I had 3 cinematographers, 2 of whom I've worked with extensively, and each one was given a single lens to work with, or a lens range to work with. So there were long, mediums, and close-ups, and then they stuck with that throughout the film shoot. So that was another way of creating limits, but also expanding the options that would be possible and letting them develop their vision over the 4 days with us. And that led to the editing room, and that led to the colorist, how I dealt with that, and the sound person, who's a sound designer I worked with also for 11 years. So a lot of these relationships are not only on film, but are also part of the process of the film. These are all friends who've worked on it. And hence, my credits, if you notice, are not listed by camera department or the grip department or anything. They're all alphabetical, because we were all there and we all did it together. And so that was kind of a sort of right to the last end. I wanted to make sure that I kept that ethos going. Right.
And I think one of the things that makes the work so complex, and I don't think I'd realised the complexity of it until I actually stood in the space with it being projected, because I'd seen individual films, but I'd never seen them side by side. And one of the things that I find so extraordinary is how you can make a piece with 7 screens and have that all in your head and make them link up and sync. But I wondered if you could just briefly walk us through the 7 different films, because they each have something different going on. And I just wondered if you could describe those 7 different concepts.
Yeah, and I guess I'll also talk about what actually we did on site that will help you understand the 7 films. I'd written to all my friends, even those who did not show up or were unable to make it to India for obvious reasons. People have lives. But they all sent me suggestions for actions or something that inspired them about what I was saying my project will be. And so a lot of those things made it into the final film in many, many different ways. Starting from, you know, a list of words that my friend Alexandra wrote to describe me, which somehow made it into the film as things that people reacted to. You cannot see it in the final edit, but there were all these situations that allowed us to generate all this footage. And so to the edit, we had 34 hours of footage from 4 days of shooting. And I lined up all the footage, synced all the, I mean, I didn't do it, my assistant editor did, synced up all the audio and gave that package to every editor to view. So they viewed it and they marked things that they liked, which you can do on the software. And then we sat down, I saw what they were interested in. We had a conversation about what the piece was about. We'd already had a conversation before the piece was even shot, and then we had a conversation after about what they saw. And each person had a different take on the footage that we pushed to the limit so that we got what we got. So I will start from the left clockwise. Mm-hmm. So as you enter the space, on the left there's a small monitor, and that's Yasha's, Yasha's edit. And essentially, her edit is the experience of us coming apart and coming back together, coming apart and coming together in slow motion, like a breathing animal. The second film is Danya's, and she edited it such that it was a composite character that flowed. So one person does an action and it's continued by the next person, it's continued by the next person for, you know, as long as her edit is, which is I think 6 minutes. So it just sort of pointed to the fact that we are each other in some strange way. The third edit is the supervising editor. You were asking how do we keep all 7 films together in our head. The supervising editor and I were in charge of ensuring that it all came together at the very end. And her interest was in, if you stand in front of her film, she really wanted you to feel destabilized and involved in the motion that's actually going on screen. So and it's very heavily layered. And that's where you hear my voice, which she recorded post facto after the shoot and edited into these seemingly arbitrary but actually very cohesive set of words that are interlinked to create a sense of, I guess, me and my relationship with my friends. That's kind of how she was working at it. The next film is the one where you see the site and you see no people, it's only the site. And Karan, who also helped directed the film based on my instructions because I needed a director since I was in it, he edited it such that he wanted to create a film that is a negative space. He says, I wanted to create a film that gives space for the other films to exist. He wanted to be the friend who allows. And he's been my friend for a very, very long time. He's a dear actor and just really amazing thinker. And that was like his act of generosity to create an empty space. And so the speakers there actually are installed and are live, but have no sound coming out of them. And that was purposeful. The next film is Arindam. And we were working with the idea of tactility and touching each other. We were always constantly in touch with each other on set. But we interpreted that as on an abstract level as the layers of film also touching each other. So there are actions. He's superimposed a lot of the footage, and one layer of footage often seems to affect or interact with the other layer of footage, an interesting thing. So that was the sort of tactility part that we were abstracting. And there are 2 more left. Oh yeah, Anand on the monitor. He was the youngest editor of all, and he was actually quite cute because he thought the proliferation of selves, which he represented by having some of us in the same site appear multiple times, simultaneously, as you know, we shot such that we could do that. And but the proliferation of selves is actually your friends and your community. And so that was where he was coming from. And then the last edit is mine, and I kind of wanted to give a sort of fragmentary portrait of all of my friends. So there's I think maybe 16 chapters, because there are 16 friends who are in the piece, and each chapter has increasingly fast cuts that constantly show fragments of one individual, and then there's a long hold with that individual being seen, again fragmentary, you can never see their full face, with a series of words overlaid. And those words were all generated by me asking my friends and the cast and the crew to respond to a sort of series of questions about their experience on set. And those are what made it into the text. So that's kind of a long word version.
No, I think that's really, really helpful to hear.
Yeah.
And thinking about the participants, and particularly that last film that you've just described, where they're giving their reflections on the 4 days together. I mean, it's funny because I was talking to one of my colleagues this morning, and we were both saying, we both feel really jealous that we weren't there. You know, it just looks like you had such an amazing time. And, you know, there was a lot of humour and love. And I think there's that real sense of camaraderie as well. And I think what's interesting about it is that not all of your friends knew each other. You were the one person that everybody knows. And it made me think a bit like, you know, when you're at a wedding or at a funeral, and actually that's the one person that everybody knows. But then, you know, so it's sort of like this kind of portrait of you with all you know, all the different sides of your personality coming together.
It's a portrait of me, as well as a portrait of just being a human being on Earth, which is kind of what I wanted that to operate that way. I mean, Yvonne can speak to the absolute love and camaraderie that was there. The 4 friends that came from the States did not know each other. And they now have a WhatsApp group for themselves. Friendships were forged.
Yeah, and I think there's one lovely quote that talks about, I'm going to get this not quite correct, but it talks about how, you know, people came together, it was like going on to camp, you stay up late at night talking about your exes, and you know, just such a lovely sentiment. And so can you talk about the activities that partly you had decided you wanted to do, but also partly your friends fed into and suggested them? Can you because, you know, they're sort of, they're very varied. On the one hand, you've got the sort of fruit abacus with you on either side with the fruit. Then you've got, you know, activities such as carrying geometric shapes. So can you talk a bit about what you were hoping to achieve with those different activities?
We started with the list of words that a friend, Alexander, had written about me in the dining hall. In the dining hall of the site. There are 4 locations on site that we shot at: the dining hall, the meditation prayer hall, the temple, and the housing blocks. So those were the 4 areas that we were at. And so we started out in the dining hall, and we ended at the temple, with fruit at the temple. But the words were just things that people reacted to. We were hidden in the space, and we would reveal ourselves if we heard a word that reflected our feelings about each other, or about me, or about themselves. And then they spoke words out too, which have not made it into this edit, but you know, that's okay. I'm trying to remember there was one area where there's sort of a big sand pit. It's actually the toilet block for the temples. But we went in there gargling, making these water sounds with water in our mouth, because a friend from Burma had talked about gurgling as a possible activity. And so I had transformed that into gargling and spitting onto this into the sand pit, on one half of the sand pit, and then Raghav, a friend of mine, was to join them all and create one half of a Rorschach ink blot. And then we like took little pieces of twine and tried to figure out how to measure it exactly and then reproduce it on the other side, which we did. I mean, the top shot shows you that we did it, but that was like, you know, the crazy sort of activity that is slightly pointless, but slightly Rorschach-y, slightly personality-based. There was another one that involves a yellow rope. We were all in a circle, and then we kind of go towards each other, taking the rope with us until we were like hopelessly entangled with each other. And that was inspired by one of my closest friends, who was also my professor. She was my Greek professor, professor of Greek as an undergrad. And she's a climber, and so her idea of trust comes from climbing, and she says ropes and tethers are part of the ethos, and so that was transformed into this activity. There's, in the meditation prayer hall, there's a swing that was suspended, and that was because a friend of mine had made a swing with two seats. It was about a couple joined together in a way, and we've transformed that into a circular swing for the piece on site. So there were those sorts of decisions that were being made constantly. Diana had told me about chasing volcanoes. Now, don't tell me how chasing volcanoes went to the thing that I actually did, but it did in my brain. There were all of these marble pedestals everywhere outside the temple. And so I told everyone, all of my friends, to get up on there and try to convince each other that we deserve to lead all the others, all our friends. And so that's why they're up there talking in gibberish, which is most evident on Anand's edit, one of the edits. So yeah, there's this whole gibberish mode where everybody's yelling at each other all the time from top of these pedestals. That was from the volcano chase. I don't know why, but but that's how the mind works. Yeah.
And one of the other things I'm really interested in is I suppose the whole process of making a film. So most of us in the room have not made a film before, and I don't think I'd realised really how complex, and you know, as you talked about the list of credits, I mean, I counted them up this morning, I think it's like 67 people. And I just wondered if you could, I mean, you've mentioned some things like, you know, well, the shoot was 4 days, but obviously you had a lot of preparation time before that. So
not that much.
Okay.
Because
just wondered if you could talk through the process, I suppose, the practicalities of how you make such a major film.
Trust. You trust your cast, you trust your crew, you trust everyone to do their job, I guess. And they are jobs, essentially. I mean, it's very, I mean, Bombay is a movie town, so it's not that difficult to get things done. And I have been making films for a dozen years, so I don't know how to talk about the process. You have a budget, you have line items, you have a line producer who keeps things in check. Without the line producer, you'll go over budget very quickly. You know, I'm the executive producer. I had Karan, who also edited that other film, who was sort of creative producer and who helped with other things. And then there was on-site, on-location production teams with whom I've worked since 2006. And you know, they're the ones who get the vans, the vanity vans, the people from here to there, the craft services, the cameras that are rented, the sound, they coordinate all of that. So it's not like I'm doing all of that. It's just I've parceled out the task to lots of different people so that I can concentrate on the work itself.
But also the fact that it's in such a remote location as well. You know,
Yes,
you have to take all of that stuff there and get all your friends there and all of that.
Logistics. It's a logistical nightmare, actually. But it's doable.
Yeah.
It's doable. It's not unheard of. And units go outside of the city all the time.
Yeah,
they just get paid twice. Twice as much, yeah.
Okay.
So on location.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we've talked about is in our space we have 7 channels, and your idea is that you're going to revisit some of the footage and create 9 channels for you know, a further iteration in the future. So what will those 2 other channels have in them?
Because I have so many friends who were not in the film and so many who would like to have come, I would like to make an animation so that everybody's included in the final version. And their ideas, so the volcano will probably make it in there. And their ideas will be represented in this imagined space within this animation. So that would be one channel. And the second one, I'm actually just thinking about a few key moments that really touched me from the footage and from the photographs that a friend, Lisa, took. And I'm just gonna really investigate those moments like over and over again until I kind of get somewhere. So those are the two other channels.
And then, will the work be finished, or is it the kind of thing that you might again revisit in the future? I mean, finished is a silly concept, isn't it? But
it's conceptually never finished, right? Because that footage could go to anyone and could be reinterpreted at any point by any editor friend that I have. So conceptually, it's never finished, but for me, I think I'll be done. I need to move on to the next project.
Yeah.
So, which I'm hoping. Again, this was a very hard piece in terms of getting permissions. I got refused permits twice, and I went to India 3 times to actually get this permission going. And the final thing that actually turned it was going over and above the trustees and everybody involved with this ashram. They have 200 locations worldwide. I mean, it's a huge organization. And my mom just gave me an introduction to the head guru. And in 2 minutes, I just met him for 2 minutes. I mean, we ended up talking for 20 minutes, but in the second minute, he gave me permission. So that's all it took. I mean, just this personal connection and this faith. I mean, he basically valued art, and he understood that there is value in saying yes to an artist, which I think the trustees were not able to. To their credit, once I got permission, everyone was on board. All the trustees helped. All the sevaks, the people who are helpers on the ashram site, were also very, very helpful. They were the most gracious at hosting all of us there. And yeah, I mean, the next project, I'm trying to get permission to attend elementary school in Los Angeles as a student, not as a participant observer, but as a student, be treated as a student for a whole year. So I think that I'll have a harder time getting permission for that.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you what your next project was, but you've told us about that.
I have a couple of institutions backing me, but that doesn't necessarily hold sway when it's children that are involved. There's too many liabilities. So we're hoping we can manage that.
So my final question before I open it out to the floor is, next week you're doing a performance at the Frieze Art Fair, and I feel that performance is really at the heart of your practice. You always feature in your own work. You rowed the ice boat, you kicked the stones in the film that was shown at Frieze last year, Stone, Breath, Mountain Dust. And so I wondered if you could talk about the relationship between live performance and then performance in your films.
I think live performance is not something I do very often. I do it when I'm invited, and typically I take into consideration the location in which it's going to be, and the context in which it's going to be presented. I try to sustain my interests through that, but it's more contextual than most of my filmed work. My filmed work is, it's really an intervention into reality, and intervening my brain space into the real lived space out there. When I'm performing, it's somehow, I don't know how to put it. It's different. It's different for me. Any thoughts, Shri? I know it's like, my live performance is like, okay, so Minds to Lose, the piece where I anesthetized myself, was originally done for the Kochi Performance Festival in 2008. So the entire process of anesthetizing myself and the farm animals was done precisely because Kochi has, in my experience, always has a very festive atmosphere during their openings. People with their cocktail drinks, wandering around, talking to each other, networking, whatever the hell they do. And I wanted none of that. I'm like, I'm not going to be a performing monkey. Instead, I'm going to be an unconscious performing monkey. And so there are these sort of moments where the context actually does dictate what I'm doing in a live piece. as opposed to what I'm thinking, which is more untethered to the context. So yeah, I mean, I was like, I want to perform for Coach, but I also don't want to perform. So how do I do it? And that was my solution. And then Coach invited me back again to do something 2 years later, and it was going to be on top of Blue Frog, this club in Delhi, which actually Kapil also designed. And it was going to be on the terraces above. And I'm like, okay, so this is a club atmosphere. Everyone's at a party. I know what Coach's parties are like. So I basically collected a group of actors in Delhi, and we basically mimicked partygoers, like from the moment they enter a party until they exit a party, in a series of freeze frame postcards shots, but there were live performers doing that. So I don't know if that explains the difference, but there is one. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, any questions from the audience?
Yeah, I've got a very practical question, really. You obviously work in a huge, disparate range of different media and methods. Do you actually ever have to do any formal training, or do you just sort of learn by doing?
Oh, I pretty much learned by doing. Yeah, I mean, I went to college, but I don't think I learned any of this there. Yeah. I mean, I was fortunate enough to, I studied Greek and Latin. I mean, I'm a classicist by training and Indo-European, specifically in Indo-European linguistics, but I also went to art school at the same time as I was doing my classics degree at UCLA in Los Angeles. And I was very lucky to be there at a time in the 90s when literally all the sort of bigwigs, Mary Kelly, Charlie Ray, Paul McCarthy, Meg Cranston, Christopher Williams, I think Sharon Lockhart, these were all people who taught there or taught me. So I'm sure that has all sunk in somewhere in my brain, but yeah. They don't teach skills.
Any other questions? Yes.
So you talked at the beginning about this, challenging the idea about kind of individual personal development being very individualistic and it being about codependence on others. And I just wondered whether you...
I'm pushing it by saying codependency. Of course, interdependency is better, but I'm pushing it. Yeah.
You don't really have to answer this question if you don't want to, but I'm just wondering whether you kind of extrapolate from that a kind of wider kind of sense of... because you talked about your work being about a human being on Earth.
Right.
I wondered whether you have a kind of wider political sense, because your work is about you and your relationships, but I just wondered, when you said that about human beings on Earth, I wondered whether you have a wider sense of...
Sure. I mean, it's even wider than just humans. It includes the rocks and the trees and the air we breathe and the chemistry that we engender in each other, which I kind of worked with in the piece that I showed at Frieze last year, which was about me kicking rocks. I mean, I was kicking dust and going up, dust, gravel, stones, big boulders, all the way up to kicking a mountain. And that was about the interaction between me and the outside world that is not necessarily human. I think something that's shifted in some of my work has been the shift from being self-contained propositions that you already know the answer to, like the ice boat, it's going to melt. Denuding the tree, it's going to not have any leaves. And you kind of already anticipate it from the very beginning into work that is a little bit more, less interested in what Jains would call non-attachment and more interested in multivalent points of view, which is also a very Jain idea. I mean, there are 3 key Jain ideas that Jains wander around the world with. My mom really threw it into me, but until about 6th grade when I balked everything that was religious. But I probably think these 3 principles are just so deeply ingrained in me that I don't have an out. And that's non-violence, non-attachment, or non-possessiveness, and anikantvad, which is essentially multiple points of view. I remember going back, I spent the first year in college when I was 17 to 18 at UCLA, you know, you read about postmodernism, you go back home, you tell your mom all about it, and she turns around and says, but you've been brought up with that. What the hell are you talking about? So that's kind of the space I'm coming from.
Any final questions? Oh, yes, Meg?
A lot of the activities are obviously not activities, well, they have elements of things we do in real life, but they're kind of abstracted activities with a group of people. And I just wondered whether, through this experience, would you recommend other groups of friends doing these activities to strengthen their friendships, or did some friendships change because of...
No. I think a lot of high schools already do these sort of trust issue based, corporate sectors do that sort of trust building exercises. I'm not really interested in that. That's not where this comes from. The last thing that we shot was the fruit abacus, and that's kind of speaks to what you're talking about. Yes, these are ordinary things that we do. We eat, we share. So the rules that I had for the fruit abacus piece was that all the participants had recourse to only 2 sentences throughout that morning shoot. And that was, I want it, no, you can't have it. And it doesn't matter what you actually did. Like, I could actually give Natasha my piece of fruit, but I could still be saying, no, you can't have it. Or I could throw it on the floor, or I could eat it myself, or I could distribute it to everyone. But I still wanted those 2 lines to operate as the overarching, to signify, it was a way of saying that what we say doesn't actually end up being what we do. So that I wouldn't recommend doing exactly what I did. I think it was just, it's of a moment, it's of a piece, it's of a people. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I've learned a lot this afternoon, and I wanted to say thank you for 2 reasons, really. Thank you for making such an amazing piece, and it's such a thrill to be able to premiere it here, to show it,
Thank you,
and
Natasha.
for the people of Manchester as well to come and see it. And thank you very much for the in conversation today.
Thanks, Natasha. Thank you, everybody.